Why do we keep pretending that personal grudges qualify as political analysis? There's a recent interview circulating where Mary Trump sat down to talk about her uncle, the current president, President Trump, and the entire segment was framed as political commentary, expert insight, insider perspective. But when you actually listen to what she says, it's not analysis, it's not reporting, it's not even coherent criticism. It's a family member with a public platform airing decades of personal grievances while wearing the costume of a clinical observer. And I want to walk through this carefully because I think this speaks to something bigger about how our media works. What gets platform as serious commentary, and why so many Americans are starting to tune this entire circus out. So, Mary Trump actually claims in this interview, she says her uncle isn't well. She speculates about his mental state, his cognitive decline, his fitness for office. And she makes these statements with the confidence of someone who has examined him professionally. But here's the thing, she hasn't. Mary Trump is not his doctor. She has not evaluated him. She has no clinical basis for any of the diagnosis she's hinting at. And she's a psychologist by training, but she hasn't treated him, hasn't tested our president, hasn't spoken to him in years by her own admission. So, what exactly is she basing this on? Public appearances? The same public appearances you and I could watch, like the mainstream liberal media hasn't done it enough, literally speculating and giving criticism to the tiny, scrainy strands of our President Trump's hair. The same clips the rest of us see, is my point. She looks at that same footage we're looking at and claiming she can see something we can't. And that's not expertise, family. That's speculation with a credential attached to it. All right.
And if you've noticed a coarseness coming out of Washington with lawmakers dropping F-bombs with impunity and labeling opponents as evil, it's not just your imagination. How the Trump playbook has taken root.
So what are you noticing now that makes you feel that something has changed?
It's not so much that things have changed qualitatively. It's just that things seem to be rapidly getting worse. I think that Donald has had undiagnosed, untreated psychiatric disorders for many, many years, predating his first administration. But given his advancing age, clearly there seem to be some indications that he has some cognitive issues, hence all of the cognitive tests he's taking and the MRIs we've heard about, but have no specific information about. And just his behavior, the way he speaks, his inability to rein himself in, his inability to stay on topic. And oftentimes it seems that he's not exactly aware of where he is or the audience he's speaking to. But there's a more general and serious issue here. Donald is a deeply insecure man, and I refer to him often as a black hole of need, and he's constantly in search of things to fill that void. Usually it's money, but sometimes it's recognition, and sometimes it's power. But the problem for us is that there is literally nothing that he can get. There is nothing that he can steal. There is no compliment he can receive that will make him feel better about himself. So he is always in search of the next thing, whether it's more money, whether it's more power, or whether it's stealing property, territory from sovereign nations. This is basically what we're dealing with right now.
Do you think that the DOJ should reopen the investigation into the auto pen, specifically pertaining to Fauci?
Well, the only thing you can really think about is the auto pen, because the most powerful thing the president has, they say, is the power of pardon. So he was pardoned by Biden, and I respect that. I know how powerful it is. It's a very powerful, they say it's literally the most powerful thing a president has. Now, whether or not I sign my things directly, always, almost everything I sign directly. You're witness to many of them. He signed very few. The only thing I know that he signed was Hunter Biden's pardon, but I'm not sure that he signed, he probably didn't sign this one. So I can't tell you what the law is. I've heard that you have to have a lot of proof. You need to have letters. You need to have all sorts of things, that the person operating the auto pen has to know exactly what it's all about. He didn't know what it was about because I saw him testify. So maybe there's something on the auto pen. Other than that, the power of pardon is very powerful.
We went through this trauma together, like 9/11 when we, came together, right?
Right, and then we're quickly torn apart,
And I gotta say, both of these disasters happened Republican watches. You know,
Right.
I remember saying that at the time, Rude, that literally Trump handed Biden the Great Depression, the Spanish flu, and the Civil War right after January 6th, all in one, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it didn't have to be that way. If Trump had any sense of grace, of respect of the office, or any of those things that he would never have, he could have gone out on a high. He could have gone out and said, "Look at this election. Oh my God, look what I did." Oh, and then the vaccine. Look at this record time. We got a vaccine, and it would have been. Those would have been two notable accomplishments,
Right.
amid all of the chaos and awful things that he did. But at least it would have been like, okay, these two things are major, and he could have used that as a unifying thing, but they didn't.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
because that's not his nature.
Yeah.
That's not the scorpion's
And
nature.
as many people have said, he largely got voted out because of his disastrous response to COVID, and that people were able to vote by mail. And it's hard to suppress a mail-in vote. You can't make it wait in line for 9 hours. You can't say that machines aren't working. You can't do all the usual voter suppression stuff. So you said instead we know what happened. We know that skeevy politicians, clout-seeking media whores, exploitive hucksters all took advantage of the chaos, the confusion, the evolving medical advice, and evolving understanding of the illness, which is what happens when, again, you have a new virus of people's natural despair about having their lives shut down. And you said, so now Fauci has been and will be the focus of a nutzoid right-wing ragegasm due to lies and COVID and short-term memory loss about how the country dealt with it. I mean, it is just, I know every day is gaslighting, but man, oh man, this was a really recent trauma for us, right?
Well, but it's also, I think about it also in terms of January 6th. We have people that were cowering behind the benches in the House of Representatives, who are now out there saying, "Oh no, they were patriots."
Yeah.
It's like, dude, we see a picture of you, Mark Wayne Mullen. We see you hunched down,
Yeah.
and now you're pretending like you weren't scared, like you were gonna, like you were gonna welcome them for an extra special tour.
Yeah, and also it's a trauma that I think we've all been trying to forget, and it's boy, I got to tell you, all the medical workers on social media, Rude, you forgot stuff. The people had to say goodbye to their relatives on an iPad. And these are the nurses that were holding the iPad while you.
So pause and think about that for a second because this matters. If I told you I could diagnose your neighbor's heart condition just by watching them walk to their mailbox, and I'm talking about Donald Trump's niece, right, who we seen earlier in this clip, uh, in the footage, you look at me like I was crazy. You'll ask me where I went to medical school, whether I ever examined them, whether I had any idea what their actual medical history looked like. And you'll be right to ask those questions. But when Mary Trump does the exact same thing about her uncle on national television, nobody asks those questions. Nobody says, wait a minute, when did you last examine him? Where's your data? Where's your clinical evidence? Instead, the segment is treated as insider insight, as if family membership somehow grants you diagnostic authority, and as if being related to someone means you understand their brain better than a trained professional who's actually examined them. That's not how medicine works. That's not how science works. And we should not pretend that's how journalism works either. And here's where it gets worse, right? As you're seeing this conversation of now. When you look at the mental state speculation, right? And now you see it now pivot into directly blaming President Trump for COVID deaths, right? And you see these two individuals blaming President Trump for economic problems, talking about the Great Depression, how it's somehow his fault. And I need you to follow me on this because this is where the argument falls apart completely. You cannot in one breath claim someone is cognitively declined, diminished, unfit, and then the next breath blame them for orchestrating a global pandemic response and a multi-year economic downturn. Which is it? Is he a master manipulator single-handedly directing world events? Or is he a diminished figure who can barely function? You cannot argue both at the same time and expect to be taken seriously. That's not analysis. That's throwing every accusation at the wall, hoping something sticks. And the fact that this segment, right, was produced, edited, and approved and published without anyone stopping to point out these contradictions tells you everything you need to know about what the standards we are operating in, right? I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about, right? The claims of President Trump's physical experience, right? The comments on the way he looks, the way he moves, the color of his skin, the bruises on his hands. And listen, I'm not here to tell you that those observations are false. Maybe he has bruises. Maybe he looks tired. You know who else looks tired sometimes? Everybody. You know who got bruises? People over 70 who take blood thinners, right? I know family members who took blood thinners, people who shake hands all day, people who walk into door frames like the rest of us. The fact that you can point to a physical observation doesn't mean you have the right to attach a diagnosis to it. And when the entire segment climaxes with personal insults about his appearance rather than substantive policy critique, right? You have to ask yourself what the actual point of this was. Was this about informing the public about the fitness of a president being presidentially fit, or was this about giving someone with a personal grudge a national platform to vent? And it goes to these two individuals on the screen right now. It goes to Mary Trump, President Trump's niece. And they're talking about January 6th. And you see the talking points, January 6th, COVID and things like that. And he handled Joe Biden, the Great Depression. Well, let's be very factual here. First of all, the January 6th event, if you really see when it comes to the January 6th event in the Russia hoax, you realize that there were two events that they were throwing at the wall to hope it stick to basically convict Donald Trump, first in the court of public opinion, which is why you have individuals keep circulating these talking points. And then second, when they tried to indict him on all of those accounts, which he overcame, right? So one man, one story, the system going against him for being truthful, and which is why they're talking about how he speak. But the simple fact is he don't hold back. He just tell it how it is. No different from your grandpa or your elders who just keep it real from the jump. You know what you get, and at the end of the day, they're not going to hissy fit around. They're going to tell you what it is like it is. And the simple fact is they're going to tell it with truth and conviction, which will leave you better off in helping you to grow, having your best interests. I don't see our President Trump not doing the same thing here. I think we can relate as him being a cool presidential grandpa to the country, right? In a very no BS sugar honey iced tea fashion. So getting back to my January 6th example, BBC, the network, tried to make it as though President Trump incited violence when he told them we're going to walk down to the Capitol and make our voices be heard. But they remixed it and transformed it, re-edited and changed the whole address our president was making and saying, we're going to walk down peacefully and make our voices be heard. They turned it into, we're going to walk down there and fight and stir up chaos, right? And those individuals who were actually part of the January 6th, some individuals were actually peacefully protesting, still got arrested and held accountable. And some were paid actors just to basically put an account of inciting violence onto our president. That's one January 6th. Russia hoax. Oh, President Trump tried to overturn the election working with Russia and getting donors in regards of Russian donors to prop him up and overturn the election. Well, if that's the case, how about this? Let me refute that. If that was so strong and so powerful to do, then why all of a sudden President Trump lost to Biden? Oh, wait, because it was the other way around. Not to mention, as I keep saying, Hillary Clinton say, oh, we should work with China then and win the election and steal the election. So all the things projected and trying to basically stop one man from telling the truth and leading this country in truth, they wanted to basically lock him away, throw away the key with anything they could so they continue to do this corruption and continue to fill up the swamp, which is being drained now. So they have really no substantiating point besides, oh, January 6th, we seen senators all over the place and worried and this, and that. Like Nancy Pelosi didn't know. Who mentioned that it wasn't Trump's fault. If I'm correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm always open to the possibility of being wrong. We're just having a productive conversation, right? But the point is, two things in common. Create a hoax or a story to stick to basically convict and keep having these talking points circulate as they were in the mainstream liberal media 24/7, even to this day. And then the Great Depression, not to mention that the country was booming before the pandemic in Trump's first term. And the simple fact is, it was manufactured. And I find it very ironic when Trump got back into office, all of a sudden, we had a shortage of eggs, and the eggs were so expensive because we had a limited amount of eggs due to the bird flu or whatever that couldn't meet the demand. So the price of eggs were high when he got in office. Why does it seem there's always something manufactured against this man when he's president currently or coming to be president again, as he currently is now? Running for president again and then becoming president now, which he's been in office for a year now. All of a sudden, there's always these manufacturer incidents. And then just like he was in his first term, everything was booming. And then next you know, before he got out of office, there was COVID, which happens that we realized to have happened to come out. The truth is, Dr. Fauci worked with the Wuhan lab all the way back to 2014. Coincidentally, wasn't President Trump in office to manufacture the pandemic. And there was basically used as fear mongering because there was actually a solution to heal that was working from the National Doctors Accord from all across the country. But Dr. Fauci actually ignored the solution because actually we already had the medicine to cure COVID. So there was no reason for it to be announced a pandemic because we already had the solution. But they had to act like it wasn't in the name of creating a vaccine that was killing multitudes of Americans. So how can I substantiate my point? But these two individuals, they just say, "Oh, the Great Depression, and this, and the third." Mind you, President Trump, again, in his term currently as he is president, his second term, is bringing back the manufacturing, right? Bringing back things to the USA. USA made things, baby. And stop relying on basically materials being exported and imported from other countries to rely on things that we need. How about we be self-sustainable as a country and make our own things as we used to, which was in good quality, like our cars back then that was made out of true metal, right? Out of true metal. Once we manufactured, thanks to the Clintons, and we basically sold our auto manufacturing factory jobs over there to China, and we got cash in return. And then in exchange, also a loss of jobs for a multitude of Americans in a working class family. They always claim to tout and be for the Democrat Party. You realize cars and the quality of life in America got cheaper and more fragile and frail, right? So now, again, President Trump is bringing back the auto manufacturing boom. Which, remember, who can I say? His name was the head of the union that was working with Kamala Harris. Sean Fain, right? The UAW, the United Auto Workers Union, right? That endorsed Kamala Harris when she was running and lost to President Trump. They were so gung-ho on trying to bring back manufacturing jobs. Because remember, Ford, Stellantis, known as Chrysler, they were getting their jobs taken, and basically Hyundai, they done took their whole factories and all of the auto manufacturing business. They were taking it over to Mexico and China for basically cheaper labor. And also, in the exchange of also getting rid of a multitude of Americans' jobs. You don't hear Sean Fain complaining now. Auto manufacturing business booming. The hub was Michigan. I pray that we don't get this senator in Michigan, Abdul Sayar, because, man, he's a Looney Tune in itself, in my opinion. But anyway, not to get off topic, but I'm just saying, you realize these talking points, and they're always doing personal ad hominem attacks and making it like his health is declining. These are all the things that the mainstream liberal media try to throw with, but it's low level, low functional, low IQ talk with no substantiated points or no data to back it up. But you see how I can go through it and just substantiate my point. Strengthen your argument, not your voice. Strengthen your argument, not your personal attacks towards this man who is inhuman as well.
To say goodbye to your dying loved one. And this just one a nurse posted, y'all forgot awfully fast about the days where so many died we ran out of body bags. I wrapped a tiny child in a Home Depot plastic sheeting and carried her into the refrigerator truck. I wore garbage bags for PPE and sutured my one issued mask back together when it broke. So many died my hospital forced ICU nurses to call in to grief counselors. So shut it with your Fauci hate. I mean, the refrigerator trucks, you remember that in New York. Bobby Kennedy just said, the ICUs were empty in New York.
I'll say, explain to your listeners that people wonder, why did we need to suppress ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine? These are well-established drugs with well-established safety profiles that have billions of doses have been given. Ivermectin is a human drug. It also works on horses, but it won the Nobel Prize because it works so well on human beings. Mm-hmm. Tony Fauci's problem was this. There's a little-known federal law that says you cannot give an emergency use authorization to a vaccine if there is any medication approved for any purpose that is shown effective against the target disease. So if Tony Fauci or anybody had admitted that hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin are effective against COVID, it would have been illegal for them to give the emergency use authorizations to the vaccines, and they could never have gotten them approved. And it would have been, a 200 billion enterprise that would have collapsed.
That is fascinating. I mean,
and then you wonder why there shouldn't have been a pandemic in the first place. I'll show you another example of the doctor who actually got suppressed and removed from Facebook from saying the truth all the way back then. This is Dr. Stella Emanuel, who basically justified and said it back in 2021-ish. She basically justified and proved as a double confirmation of what you just seen recently, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said.
I see parents walk in, I see diabetics sit in my office knowing that this is a death sentence and they can't breathe. And I hug them and I tell them it's going to be okay, you're going to live. And we treat them and they live. None has died. So if some fake science, some person sponsored by all these fake pharma companies comes out and say, oh, we've done studies and they found out that it doesn't work, I can tell you categorically it's fake science. I want to know who is sponsoring that study. I want to know who is behind it. Because there is no way I can treat 350 patients and counting and nobody is dead and they all did better. And then you're going to tell me that you treated 20 people, 40 people and it didn't work. I'm a true testimony. So I came here to Washington, D.C. to tell America, nobody needs to get sick. This virus has a cure. It is called hydroxychloroquine, zinc, and Zithromax.
So then you see individuals like this who can't substantiate no point, backed by no data, sit here and just talk about, how COVID was horrible and pin it on the president of the United States, Donald Trump.
Well, you got to say goodbye to your dying loved one. And, this just one, a nurse posted. Y'all forgot awfully fast about the days where so many died. We ran out of body bags. I wrapped a tiny child in a Home Depot plastic sheeting and carried her into the refrigerator truck. I wore garbage bags for PPE and sutured my one issued mask back together when it broke. So many died, my hospital forced ICU nurses to call in to grief counselors. So shut it with your Fauci hate. I mean, the refrigerator trucks, you remember that in New York. Bobby Kennedy just said, the ICUs were empty in New York. I'm like, oh my God.
The so many people were dying that they would line up and applaud when somebody recovered enough to be able to leave the hospital.
Remember that when they would leave the hospital and everybody, they all be lined up, the medical workers. Yep.
Yeah. Because and again, one of my closest friends was an ICU nurse during COVID, and she said if you came to the ICU, you were dying. Yeah. That was just the way it was.
Yeah.
And that she would try to comfort families as best she could, but it was a nightmare. I know another nurse friend who quit because of the PTSD she suffered due to just all of the death and horror that she witnessed.
Yeah. I mean, and there's Dr. Fauci, this hero to many of us going way back to AIDS crisis and before. But you said, imagine spending your entire life saving millions of lives, and now Rand Paul and associated chodes, chads, and chuds are trying to get you to fall into a perjury trap so they can jail you for the rest of whatever life you have left at 85. Imagine sitting there listening to Senator Rick. What would it look like if Skeletor to Python? That's remarkably accurate.
Wow.
Scott, who led a company, a hospital company that committed massive Medicare fraud and who himself took the Fifth Amendment 75 times during a civil suit, call you a villain. Yeah, I mean, it just, you said, I wish Fauci had followed up every assertion of his Fifth Amendment rights with, and based upon my rights under the First Amendment of the Constitution, I'd like to tell you to go yourself. I too, and then you have some more creative variations that I can't read on my family radio show, but I agree with you.
Yeah. I would just like to say I did update it from something. I did update it to one.
I can't listen to these individuals no more. The ignorance is blows my mind, right? However, I do want to say thank you to my doctors, nurses, individuals in the medical field, medical assistants, secretaries, specialists, schedule specialists. Look, office assistants, thank you for what you do. Now, this is where the bigger conversation starts to come in, right? Why does unhinged personal mockery like this get platformed as political insight while actual policy debate gets ignored? Think about it. You could have a segment about trade policy, about immigration reform, about national debt, about education, about public safety. You could have serious people having serious conversations about the things that actually affect your life, your family, your community, your paycheck. Instead, we get this. And now I'm speaking on it from a health perspective to make sure that the truth is out there when it comes to that medicine that I showed you with backing up my points of the hydroxychloroquine, whatever, however you say it. You get it. You heard Robert F. Kennedy say it. You heard Dr. Stella Emanuel say it. And look, we get a family member, Mary Trump, speculating about another family member's mental health, in this case, our president, with zero clinical evidence. The same way these fools are sitting here talking about COVID with zero clinical evidence. And Dr. Fauci has the nerve to at once said he can back it up, everything he's saying, when he was up there prancing and saying how he had the solution of the world with the vaccination, but now he's pleading the fifth when it comes to a hearing. Interesting. So the media presents it like it's Woodward and Bernstein breaking Watergate. The reason this matters is not because, look, I feel bad for Trump. I don't. Trump is the man. He's phenomenal. God has his hand on him. So, and at the end of the day, just the courage. I actually admire President Trump, right? One man, one human to go through all that, right? He's been in an arena his whole life. He can handle the criticism. The reason this matters is because it lowers the bar for everybody, right? It tells every media outlet that this is acceptable. You could see that they never substantiated their point the same way Mary Trump, the niece, didn't substantiate their point. So you don't need evidence. You don't need clinical data. You don't need to be fair. You just need to have the right target and the right tone. And you can say whatever you want. I think that's disrespectful, right? So from my perspective, this is exactly the kind of content that drives regular people away from political media. That average American wakes up, goes to work, take care of their family, pays their bill. They don't have time for this. They don't have patience for fake expertise dressed up as news. When they see segments like this, they don't get more informed. They get more cynical. They start to believe that all political commentary is just people with axes to grind, yelling at each other. And you know what? Based on what we're seeing here, they're not entirely wrong. The problem is that legitimately serious analysis gets lumped in with this stuff. And then nobody trusts anybody. And that's the real damage. It's not about one interview. It's about the entire economic system of political media has been poisoned by the incentive to produce emotional content over informative content, which is what I'm here to give. Informative content, backing it up with receipts. No narrative, no truth, just facts and receipts. And we having a productive conversation on this foolery to hopefully move things forward. Also, meeting the bar, being as we should be actually admired and be at the bar that our president is setting about being transparent and being truthful, right? But let's be real for a second. There is legitimate conversations to be had about presidential fitness, of course. And I believe our president is in tip-top shape, live a full life, and we're blessed in my heart. And it goes out to the administration. I pray for the administration, all our worldly leaders, right? So I get it. There's a legitimate conversation to be had about age and health and the demands of the office. And I pray our president remains healthy and all the individuals a part of the administration, as well as you, family, and all of us watching. We only got one life to live and tomorrow's not promised. But the way you have that conversation is with transparency, with medical records, with independent evaluations, with verifiable data. You don't have it through a niece who hasn't spoken to her uncle in years making guesses on cable news. And when the media chooses the latter over the former, They are not serving the public. They are serving ratings and they are serving narratives. And I think they should be held accountable to that. And if you cannot help, if there should be a standard that should be held. And if you cannot uphold that standard, then we need to get rid of these mainstream liberal media outlets, right? They are serving whatever gets clicks and comments and shares. If that's the case, then be on YouTube and have your little platform there. But to be on national television spewing that propaganda, that's dangerous. And it should be very unacceptable with the FCC and things like that. And I know the FCC is working on things in regards to regulations and making sure that there's fair air and time for both political candidates. It's a shame, right? You got Democrats getting all the airtime with the lunch ladies on The View, but then they can choose not to basically put a Republican conservative individual on there and give them fair airtime. So it's just political bias everywhere in itself. And how can you be biased spreading the news, right? If you are like CNN, who says the most trusted news, how could you, right? When you're paid and bought. And just like with Dr. Fauci example, good doctors turn to bad doctors all the time. They get paid and bought. The same way our news media outlets have been. Not saying they have once before not been good, but over time it speaks for itself and their own actions, right? Dr. Fauci phone got handed over to the Department of Justice, the COVID phone, and that'll speak for itself, right? So I say all that to say, let's uphold the truth, right? And here's the thing, right? There's no acknowledgement when it came to that Mary Trump, right? The segment doesn't even attempt to be balanced, right? Mary Trump has a well-documented personal and financial history with her own with her uncle, right? There's no acknowledgement of that. There's no disclosure that she's written books criticizing him, that she has a financial interest in maintaining public animosity toward him, that her credibility on a specific subject is compromised by her personal stake in the outcome. None of that gets mentioned. She's presented as a neutral observer, as a concerned family member, as someone whose opinion should carry weight. But she's not neutral. She's not objective. She's not an independent voice. She's a participant in decades-long family conflict who has chosen to make that conflict public. And that's fine. She has a right to hear to her opinion. But the media has a responsibility to contextualize that opinion, to flag the obvious conflicts, and to let the audience know what they are actually watching, is my whole point. And they don't do that. They just let her talk and they frame it as news. Now, to be fair, I want to acknowledge the other side of this. Some people will argue that family members have unique insight, that growing up with someone being around them for decades gives you a perspective that no outsider observer can have. There's some truth to that. Family does know things about you that the public doesn't, but there's also a boundary to that, right? You can't just go airing out individuals' business. People have reputations, right? So there's a difference between sharing personal anecdotes, personal anecdotal experiences, and making clinical diagnoses. And there's a difference between saying he was difficult to grow up with and saying he's medically unfit to serve, right? You can speak to your experience, but you don't have to attack the person. One is personal, the other is a medical claim, right? And Mary Trump blurs that line over and over again in this interview, presenting personal grievances as if there were professional assessments. I'm surprised she's not held accountable. President Trump must be given her grace, but the media let her do it, and they should be held accountable, right? Because it makes for better television than actually debating policy. So when you look at all of that, family, the real question I keep coming back to is this: what would serious political commentary look like? I mean, I've tried to uphold it myself, right? Picking stories and have productive conversations, and we talk about it, family, together, and bringing them down to the life wisdom of it and what we can take from it and being better individuals and stuff like that, because we all have to do some work. So when you look at that, what would it look like if we judge politicians by the actual consequences of their policies instead of by the speculation of their estranged relatives? What would it look like if the media spent as much time analyzing the national debt, the border, the cost of living, and the state of education as they spend analyzing one man's hand bruises? I'll tell you what it looked like. It would look like more informed public. It would look like the voters who actually understand the trade-offs involved in policy decisions, right? It would look like a country that can have hard conversations without descending into personal welfare or political violence, right? It's because of these incentives of the media industry reward conflict over clarity. And as long as that's true, we're going to keep getting segments like this with talking points and foolery and ignorance, right? So the tools we need is already in our head: common sense, skepticism, the willing to ask who benefits from this narrative, right? At the end of the day, That's what I take from this, and that's what you should take from this. You don't have to be a doctor to know when someone is telling you a story instead of facts. You don't need a degree in media studies to see when an interview is designed to provoke emotion instead of provide information. Mary Trump benefits from staying in the headlines. The media outlet benefits from the viral clips. The audience gets nothing but more noise. But that's the part that bothers me the most because we deserve better, family. You deserve real analysis. You deserve honest conversations about the things that actually matter. You deserve a media ecosystem that respects your intelligence enough to give you evidence instead of speculation. Now, I'm going to leave you with something to think about. The Bible says in Proverbs chapter 12, verse 18, the words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. And I'm going to break that down for you, family, because this applies directly to what we just discussed. Mary Trump's words in the interview were reckless. They were not based on evidence. They were not grounded in clinical reality. They were not offered with acknowledgement of her own bias or limitations. They were swords aimed at one person, but wounding everyone who hears them by degrading the standard of what we accept as serious commentary. The wise alternative is to speak with humility, to acknowledge what you don't know, and to offer evidence for what you claim, and to recognize that words have consequences. That's why I offered evidence in debunking the whole COVID thing, right? But that's the biblical principle here. Reckless speech does real damage, and the tongue of the wise, the person who speaks carefully and truthfully, brings healing instead of harm. For individuals, family who may not be spiritual, here's the life wisdom. Not every opinion deserves the same weight. Just because someone is talking on television does not mean they know what they're talking about. You have to learn to distinguish between someone who has done the work and someone who is working out a personal grievance in public. That distinction will serve you in politics and business and relationships in every area of life. Learn to ask 3 questions before you accept anyone's argument. What is their evidence? What is their bias? And what do they gain from me believing this? And if you can answer those questions honestly, you will never be fooled by a good performance again. So let me ask you, family, do you think the personal attacks on politicians' appearance and health should count as political commentary, or should we hold the media to a higher standard? Let me know in the comments, hit the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on your post notifications. Spread that peace, love, and positivity. Let the love supersede the hate. I'll catch you next one, family.